Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this follow-up webinar on self-care in stressful times that was presented on March 27th. If you attended, we're starting a little bit early, so maybe what we'll do is we'll just give a few minutes for people to finish registering before we actually officially kick off. So if you have a minute, just maybe to notice your chat box in the control panel, I did include some messages in there for you, places where you can access the Google Drive to find the worksheets that we'll be referring to today that hopefully you've already downloaded and reviewed. And also that link also takes you to the PDF copy of this PowerPoint presentation, which I just uploaded a few minutes ago. And there's also the link to the recording of part 1 of this session. And so also too, maybe just to make sure that we have all our checks in, all our I's dotted off and our T's crossed off. Maybe if you just want to show a show of hands of who can hear me, or obviously if you can't hear me, you wouldn't be lifting your hand, but it looks like we're good. Okay, perfect. Yeah, okay, thanks, Laura. Okay, great. Thank you for that. I'll put all your hands back down. There we go. Okay, fantastic. So I don't see the chat box. Okay, if you don't see the chat box, Alex, maybe just go back to your control panel. It should be one of the options, one of the tabs that you can just click on the arrow and it'll expand for you. Just let me know if that works for you. If not, let me just see if I send you another message. Hello, everyone. And maybe that'll make it appear. I don't see the links. Okay, and welcome to this webinar. How about this? Did you guys see that come through? Yes, perfect. Okay, great. So if there was nothing previous to that, yes, everyone's saying yes, good. Okay, so let me just give you again the link to the Google Drive with the worksheets. So you have them. So let me send that. Okay, so there it is. That's the worksheets that hopefully you've already visited, but if you didn't, there it is again. And thank you. You're welcome. And this is the recording to part 1. I'll send you this link as well. Copy here, paste, and send. So there you go. So that's the recording to part 1 of this webinar. And you will receive later today, you'll receive a follow-up message via email, and it will have the link to today's recording. So you'll be able to listen to both. Okay. Okay, so that's a little bit of housekeeping. So we're right on time, so we'll go ahead and start. We've got 40 people on the line, plus the 3 of us presenting, facilitating, so this is a great number. So welcome again, everyone, and welcome back to this follow-up webinar on self-care in stressful times, which was presented on March 27th. If you attended last month, you'll remember that we discussed anxiety caused by COVID-19 and other stressful situations, and how these stresses can impact our physical, mental health and our social wellness as well. And so we presented strategies on intentional self-care and different examples on how we can put this self-care plan together for ourselves, and also to suggest recommendations for our students or our colleagues or our friends and family. So today, this follow-up webinar is a chance for us to debrief your personal attempts at utilizing these tools and these models that we offered in part 1. Now, if you didn't have a chance to try them out, they are available. I just sent the Google, the link to the Google Drive in the chat box. If you don't see it, just let me know and I'll assist you after I'm done this introduction. And so today we'll examine these tools and these models in greater detail, and we'll also talk about the barriers and opportunity that arise in our attempts to improving our own well-being. And so maybe we can just go to the next slide. So before I go any further, I'd just like to take a moment to recognize, just on the next slide here.
Changing.
Thank you.
There we
Yep.
go.
Perfect.
There we go.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Thank you. So before we go any further, I'd just like us to take a moment to recognize that CBIE is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, and that Niagara College is on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work there today. And my apologies for the pronunciation. I always do try my best. So hopefully that one was okay. And so just to remind ourselves that these gathering places are home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And this acknowledgement reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and the friendships of Indigenous peoples. And that we honor their leaders, past, present, and future. And so a couple of housekeeping items on the next slide on the control panel. So just realize, again, we did a little test on the control panel. So you know where your microphone is, you're automatically muted. And if you want to speak up at any point in time, and we do really encourage you to do that so that this session can be really interactive and interesting, just raise your hand and that'll be my cue to unmute you. So if I unmute you by accident, my apologies. So we'll work through that together. And also sometimes if we ask you questions to raise your hand, we just did that a little bit earlier. And so just out of curiosity to help you test out your hand raising button on your control panel, how many of you attended the session on February 27th? Just raise your hand for me. So I'm looking at the panel now. So it looks like most of you did, but some of you didn't. Okay, great. So that's good to know. Okay, good to know. The other item here is that, so you have the handouts, they're on the Google Drive, so that's in the chat box. If you don't have the link, just let me know. And that if you have any questions, if you don't have a microphone, if you want to, speak up and you don't have a microphone, just send it to me in the question box. I can read it out loud and then we can answer all of your questions. And we'll try to get through all the questions. If we don't, please just put in your question. We might not take it right away. We might wait for the Q&A. But if we don't take up your question specifically, we do have it on file. And if we need to follow up with you after the fact, we can, or if there's a Q&A document that we can post on the Google Drive afterwards. Okay. And so my name is Melissa. I should have started with that. I'm the Manager of Professional Development at CBIE, and I'll be facilitating the technical behind the scenes aspect of this webinar with my two colleagues from Niagara College. And so Laura Fakla is the International Student Advisor at Niagara College, and she advises students on academics, immigration, transitions, and delivers mental health first aid and safe talk suicide alertness to students and colleagues. And Natalie Bovenhoff is the International Student Engagement Coordinator. She's responsible for an array of academic and non-academic student activities, both on and off campus. And so thank you so much to the both of you for hosting this, the first and this follow-up webinar. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. And so the floor is all yours.
So
hi,
today,
everybody.
sorry, Laura, I can't see you this time.
You can't see me?
I can't see you. Go ahead,
Okay.
Laura.
No, go ahead. I was just saying hello. It's all you.
So here's just our presentation overview. So we're going to start with a welcome and a warm-up. In section 2, we're going to do a quick review of what we talked about in our last webinar, so our self-care in stressful times. And then in part 3, which is where we're going to spend the biggest chunk of our time, is on our self-care worksheets and activities. So, Laura, if you want to just chat a little bit about yourself and add to what Melissa said.
Sure. So those that were on the session last month already, which is almost a month ago, which is unbelievable. I've been with Niagara College since 2007. I've been in my role as an international student advisor since 2008. And over those years, I developed an interest and a passion for mental health and wellness, not only for our students, but for my colleagues as well. Those of us who work in the college system and in international education know that we do a lot of things that on paper look like we just do academic and immigration advising, for example, but we know that things like physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health, relationship health impacts how students proceed through their studies, and how then us in a helping role stay well to be able to help those students through their challenges. So over the years, I became a mental health first aid facilitator and also Safe Talk, so I could be able to help my students, help myself, and help my colleagues as well. Natalie?
Thank you, Laura. So just like Laura, I have been with Niagara College for quite some time. I started in 2005 as a teacher in our English for Academic Preparation program. I transitioned over to being a part-time support staff as well as the social activities coordinator. And I've been working full-time as the international student engagement coordinator since 2017. And like Laura, I started to develop just an interest in mental health and helping our students support their mental health. After seeing in both my roles, one as a teacher, but also as a support staff, just seeing so many things that our students go through and just looking for different ways to engage with them and to help support them. And so I became a mental health first aid facilitator, and really enjoyed that sort of outreach and support with our students and with my coworkers as well. And so that kind of leads us into our first activity. So for our first activity, we just want to ask you guys to think about something. We've now been in this COVID-19 situation, this quarantine, for over 30 days, and it takes 30 days for something to become part of our routine. And we wanted to know, how are things developing in your remote working situation? Are you developing bad habits? Are you developing good habits? And in that, I want you to also think of not just, a bad habit being something like, oh, I snack too much during the day. But really think of how you do things, and are there some things that maybe you've actually improved upon being in this remote working situation? So what are some good habits you've taken into your working situation, and what are some bad habits? Or if you feel like you've got a balance of good and bad habits, or maybe you're just unsure how this is becoming part of your daily routine. So Melissa, are you posting that? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, here we go. So we've got so far about 30 people have voted, and so we'll give people a few more seconds to get their vote in, and then we'll show the results.
Perfect.
So Natalie, have you developed some good habits and bad habits, or a combination?
I do think definitely a combination. I think that in some ways that checking in with people has become, I think, a much more active part of my day. Whereas before, sometimes you just kind of bump into people or you see people and check in with them that way. I find being remote, we need to be much more intentional in how we check in with coworkers. So I think that that's helped in some good habits. Some bad habits. Well, I think that I find it harder to keep on one particular task right now, if that makes sense. And I don't know whether it's because I'm homeschooling my 3 girls, as well as working, that I find that I'm almost always involved in about 14 different activities at any given time, I think. And so I find it a lot harder to stay with one particular task until it's finished in this situation. So I'd say that's probably a bit of a bad habit that I'm developing, I've got so many different things on the go. How about you, Laura?
You know, I like what you said about connecting more in a meaningful way with people. Because I always say at the office we do the walk by where we just like we say hi, how are you as we walk by people, but we don't stop to wait for the answer.
Mhm.
That being said, you know, I am spending more time than I prefer on my social media and email and video chats and all of that when I'm waking up. And I would like to move away from the first thing that I do is pick up my phone. But I feel like because I'm always checking in on different people in different situations, that's the first thing I do.
Mhm.
So that's one of those habits I need to manage a little bit better. So how's our poll?
Yeah, so the poll, we've got 60% of our voters that have, our participants that have voted. And so out of 58 participants, so we'll just close the poll and share the results. So some of you indicated that you weren't able to select. So I'll just put all of your hands down. And if you had a trouble answering that poll, could you just lift your hand up for me so I can see? Some people said they couldn't so it was, you could only select one of the four options. So just write in the chat, in the comment box, in the question box if you were having issues, but you should have been able to select one of many options. The other polls coming up, you'll be able to select more than one option. So just to let you know. Okay, so we've got 3% of said that they're developing bad habits, 25% said they're developing good habits, 64% said they're developing a combination of both, and 8% said they were unsure.
Thank you.
So in the next section, we're just going to do a quick review of self-care in stressful times and what we talked about in our last webinar. Now, especially if you weren't a participant in our last webinar, if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them into that question box or to put up your hand for Melissa to see. It will be a quick review so we can get to looking at the actual use of the worksheets, okay? So looking at the 4 A's of taking charge of stress and then how that feels or unrolls in this COVID-19 situation. So the 4 A's of taking care of stress are alter, avoid, accept, and adapt. So when we look in this particular situation, we aren't able to alter or remove the source of this stress. We're not able to change the situation of the pandemic. So there's very little we can do to alter this stress. And similarly, we can't avoid the stress. We can't just say no to this particular stress in our life because, again, it's a pandemic situation. It's beyond our control. So then what can we do? We can accept. We can accept that this current situation is stressful. And sometimes that's one of the biggest hurdles to get over, that just admit it and accept it. Yes, it is stressful. But we can change our reactions and our behaviors. And that change will help us change the perception of the situation, which will allow us to cope better with the situation. We can also adapt. So we can adapt to change in order to function in this current situation. This requires us to adapt in all areas and not just in our work life or the work environment. And that's really key for us to look at here. And as we move on and we talk about this being the whole picture and that we can't just look at how this is affecting our work life or our students' lives. We have to look at how it's affecting the entire person as a complete individual. So those are our 4 A's of taking charge of stress.
And then we look at the impact of caring in stressful times. And we reflected on this last time with regards to, you know, as why we do what we do as helpers. But then on the flip side of that, what are the impacts of the roles that we've chosen. And so this is a model called the professional quality of life. And on the one side, there's compassion, satisfaction. So this is the pleasure that you get out of helping people. So in this time, especially working remotely and not being in front of our students, you know, we may have increased pleasure knowing that we can still help from afar. And, you know, if you're doing any Zoom chats with students, you can still feel that you're needed and you're helpful through the video screen. On the flip side of that is the concept of compassion fatigue, burnout, and secondary trauma. You know, in my case, being available and not finding that balance for myself with being online in the normal workday is, you know, maybe I might be experiencing some compassion fatigue regarding constantly being in the helping mode and feeling like I'm constantly dealing with the same sort of issues that are coming up. You know, burnout is a kind of a next phase of that, right? When just not feeling like you're able to help anymore, right? You can't fix everybody's problem. Or you don't see there's any end in sight. You know, there's one thing after another. You know, we go on leave and then you wait for the college is now closed, then grades come out online, and then, you know, people are worried about failing, and then you got immigration stuff, and you're like, oh my goodness, when is this going to end, right? And then the concept of secondary trauma, where, you know, a lot of people are experiencing losses that we hear about, loss of loved ones, loss of jobs, loss of school, connections, and taking into account that has impact on people, and that can transfer onto ourselves, you know, whether we're realizing it's happening or not, right? And, you know, reflecting on maybe things that happened to you and how these things are now bubbling up, feelings or experiences that that you are experiencing. So yeah, these would be the different impacts of caring, which we all love to do, but we need to be mindful of how that impacts us.
So for a debrief for our first poll, we were hoping that maybe we could get some examples from the participants of what are some new ways of doing our jobs and or good or bad habits. So when we look at the new ways of doing your job, those would be those good habits. Are there new things that you are doing that you're actually finding that might be more effective than the way you previously did your job? And then what maybe, if anybody wants to share, some bad habits that we may need to get over before we get back into the office.
So whoever would like to share, please go ahead and either raise your hand so I can unmute your microphone, or you can type in into the question box if you don't have a microphone, or if you don't want to speak, use your microphone, you can type it in and I can read it out loud.
So Natalie, do you have anything to share?
Well, other than what I shared previously, I think that as I was saying, one of the bad habits I'm developing is just having so many different things on the go. And I think one of the reasons is because you're not seeing people that you're working with. I find that, you know, I might be doing, you know, one thing with one coworker and one thing with another coworker, and we're not able to have the same types of meetings that we used to do. So there's more sort of shorter touch points throughout the day as you hand work back and forth, as opposed to completing a project or completing something together. So I think that one of the things I'll have to get used to again is sort of that one-on-one or group meeting where you actually can complete or make a good chunk of a project that you're working on with somebody, as opposed to, you know, I start something here and then send it on to Michelle and then wait for it to come back and hand it off to Marilia. So I think that sort of is going to have to be something I'm going to have to get used to again.
For sure. Yeah.
So we have a few comments that have come in, and I also have Parvinder Kaur. So if Parvinder, I'm just going to unmute you and see if you want to and speak up. So the mic is yours.
Well, hi everyone. Hi Natalie and hi Laura, and hope you are doing great and safe at your places. Being within this situation, I feel like that I am actually developing a good habit of being on the technology, because earlier there were a lot of things which I was not able to, I was not even aware of this Go webinar thing, and Microsoft meetings and even Zoom thing. So, but now there are like so many things I know, and it's like possible to reach out to people even being at on one single place, because I am also into some international education. So earlier I used to travel, but now it's like it's easy somewhere. But then yes, it has a lot of losses also. But then it's actually a good experience being with the technology, I would say, and I'm having good time with family. That's the good thing.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you, Parvinder. And now, Linda, I'll unmute you as well. So there we go. Oh, thank you. Oh, Linda, no, you just put your hand down. Okay, so you, maybe she doesn't want to. Okay, let's see if there's anyone else. Okay, so I'll read some of the comments. So bad habit, not taking a break from Sharda. I've got here, Heather, short daily meetings with team members through MS Teams, using OneNote to add to agenda and collectively create minutes in real time. So that's good habits. Another good habit here, setting reminders for myself to reach out to my family and friends regularly to check in. Not something I used to do as a total introvert. Bad habit, not going out much at all unless absolutely necessary, and not getting enough fresh air regularly. And so another good habit here, able to take information in more from home than in a group setting at work. Okay, so more focused, I guess, at home. That's great. One here, bad habit, skipping lunch or having late lunch. Oh, and she says it could be good or bad. I plan to take my next day the night before, actually putting it on paper. Okay, so I guess I plan my next day right the night before. So put everything on paper, how many meetings are taking place, what needs to be done on that particular day, even line out my kids' school work for the day. Yes, we have to be really organized, don't we, right? Because we have, yeah. So another bad habit here from Toishi is bad habit is watching too much of the news. Yes, that's easy to do. And Natalie and Laura, this is from Heather. I have another meeting. Okay, so someone else is going to be heading off. So thank you for joining us, Heather, and I hope you'll have the link to hear the recording. So that's all we've got for now, and no more hands are up at the moment. So
Perfect.
Yep.
Well, Laura, would you like to talk about the mental health continuum?
Absolutely. So we talked about this in our first session, so I'll just review it briefly. The mental health continuum model is a way for us to check in on ourselves and others on where we are in the continuum. Are we in the healthy phase? Are we reacting? Are we injured, or are we ill? And obviously, the goal is to stay in the green, stay in the healthy phase. But an important thing to remember about the continuum is that we can all move back and forth through the continuum, and we don't, and so this in two ways is a good reminder and a tool to use for ourselves and others, that if we are in the injured or ill areas, we're not always going to be stuck there. There is opportunity to move into the green. And when we're in the green and we find that we're moving into the other colors, it is a reminder that you know, there are, this is kind of what life is. You know, we move through the continuum, and so using this model as your own personal check-in and checking in with others is a good way to reflect on your wellness, and then finding ways, as we'll talk about next, on how we can move back into that green area when we are you know, kind of sliding into the yellow, orange, and red parts of the continuum.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, particularly in a situation like this, when I look through the things that qualify under the reacting category on the model, so much of that is really how we're kind of all living right now. I know so many people are having trouble sleeping in this situation. We're all suffering from decreased social activity. You know, we may all be experiencing some sort of nervousness or anxiety about not knowing what the future holds. And that's why it is so important, as we move on, to talk about this idea of self-care and what are we doing for ourselves to make sure that we're trying to keep ourselves in that green section of the model. So during our first session, we talked about this idea of self-care versus intentional self-care. And often people think, okay, well, self-care, you know, go to the gym, things like that, or eat well. But the important thing to notice about intentional self-care is that it's an activity that's been done, an activity you are doing purposely to take care of your own mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical health. So I mentioned earlier about the whole person, and that's what's so key here, that this activity is a planned, purposeful activity that I am doing to improve my mood, to reduce my anxiety, to refuel myself. And what's key is that this activity is not forced. I like the example of going to the gym. So often people say that exercise is self-care, but if I hate going to the gym, then maybe I'll go and maybe I'll get a good workout, but it's not going to improve my mood. It's not going to refuel me. It's actually going to create sort of a negative loop when it comes to my mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. So I may have checked off that physical health box, but I'm missing out. I'm causing some issues in the other areas. So your self-care, for it to be an intentional piece of self-care, it needs to be a choice, it needs to be planned, and it needs to be something that is going to satisfy you, something that's going to make you happy.
And we added a piece on resilience. So, you know, caring for yourself, when you're practicing self-care or doing something to maybe think it's self-care, reflecting on, am I doing this to cope with the situation, just to get through it? Or am I actually building my strength and my resilience for now and the future? And so resilience is that element that helps us to bounce back when we face challenges. So not just what's happening now, but what's happening, what might happen in the future, and especially those things that come out of the blue. And it's not something that we do alone. So even in these times where we are self-isolating, is to remember that we need others around us to help us build our resilience. We need to be able to receive help and to give help. And to me, both of those things are signs of strength and courage. And the really interesting thing about resilience, it's not something that is innate to us, right? It's something that we can actually prepare and plan to do. And later on in this session, we've provided an online workbook that is all about building and preparing and planning your resilience.
Thank you, Laura. Oh. Just a second, my screen doesn't seem to want to go forward. There we go. So these are some of the self-care models that we discussed in our previous webinar, and these are the worksheets that were made available to you beforehand. So as we move forward, we're going to talk about the dimensions of wellness, cognitive reframing, shift framework strategy, and then look at a self-care starter kit. So for our second poll, we'd like to know, what worksheets did you use to practice your intentional self-care? So did you use the shifts, the reframing thoughts, your well-being check-in? Did you use one of the other tools or worksheets, or did you not use any of the worksheets to practice some intentional self-care?
Okay, so people are voting. We've got about 30% already. So the answers are coming in. We'll just give people a few seconds.
Laura, what one is your favorite?
On my phone, I have an app about reframing thoughts. It's a thought diary. And I also I used to have an app just about gratitude. And then I found another app through a course, an online course through Yale University called The Science of Well-Being. And it had, it had you tracking gratitude, savoring, connections, and some other things. And then I found another online tool that you can build your own custom journal. And that is what I've been using. And it kind of is a combination of all of these different strategies that we've talked about, that I've built into my own journal. And I think we shared a screenshot of that. So it includes a morning routine, an evening routine, a to-do list, things I'm grateful for, I'm savoring, anything I need to reflect on, as well as I'm trying to wake up dancing rather, so because I realize when I start moving right away, I feel good. So, I have a song of the day that I want to dance to in the morning. So, yeah, so that's what I've been using.
Perfect.
How about you?
So I do quite like the 6 dimensions worksheet. I mentioned that in our last session, that I find it very straightforward, and also just I think that you can kind of pick one thing per area of your life at a time, that you can look at a way to make it better, and to practice taking care of yourself in that way, whether it's your emotional, your physical, your relationships. And I find that really useful to sort of target one thing at a time, so that it doesn't get overwhelming. I think sometimes when especially if you're having a really difficult time, you can really get overwhelmed by how many things you think you need to fix or change in your life. And so I find that 6 dimensions is really great, because it provides a sort of an easier step-by-step way to work on things. How is our poll going?
Sure, we're up to about 60%, so that was what we had last time. So I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. And so 6% said self-care strategies, the shift, 19% reframing thoughts, 10% my well-being check-in, other tools, 13%, and none, almost 60%.
Okay.
So do we have anybody that would like to share their experience with their worksheet, either by show of hands if you'd like to speak, or just type in a question if there's something you'd like to share in particular about your experience?
So no hands up at the moment, and nothing in at the moment.
Okay, so For now then, how about we move on to maybe looking at using the worksheets, and maybe then if people are feeling more up to it at the after we talk a bit more in depth about using the worksheets, then perhaps some people would like to share their experiences. That sound okay, Laura?
Perfect. Yep.
Okay, which actually leads us right into our next poll. And maybe this is why people are a little reticent to share. If you used a worksheet, how did you find the experience? Was it useful, confusing, frustrating, not useful, or have you not tried using one of the worksheets?
Okay, so the votes are coming in.
Perfect.
The 6 dimensions worksheet is quite interesting because as a runner, I put a lot of emphasis on following a training plan, and which I think because I feel good when I get out there and I can check off the box that I've done this training. However, it could be to the detriment of my physical health if I'm running through injuries, for example. And then if I'm not paying attention to that, and I end up not being able to run because of an injury, then that's going to affect my emotional health and my mental health, because then I won't be able to get that runner's high and be able to check those boxes on my training plan. So it's really interesting when you start looking at all of the different interconnections between health and how not paying attention to them when they need attention could really impact the others later on.
Agreed. And I think,
sorry.
go ahead, Melissa.
So we're about at 50%. Sorry, you can go ahead and make your comment. The 6 dimensions, so someone's asking, which one is the 6 dimension worksheet? So I think that we, maybe I didn't name them correctly. Is that possible?
Yeah, there's 2 different ones. The 6 dimension is the one with like the little colorful circles at the top of it. And then you reflect on the 6 dimensions of wellness, and the shift is what shifts can you make in your personal, interpersonal, office, home environments.
Okay.
I
think it's possible that because we have the shifts, we have the reframing thoughts, and then we have the checklist, but maybe the 6 dimensions is not has not been uploaded, so we might have to send that off afterwards.
So we will go over that as we take a look at each of the individual worksheets as well, and then we can see if anyone's seen it before.
Okay, perfect. So I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. And so 19% said that the worksheets were useful, 11% said confusing, 4% frustrating, no one said that they were not useful, and 74% said they did not use a worksheet.
Perfect.
Frustrating is an interesting response, right? Because be interested to know more about that. But as you start to do this work for yourself, it could be frustrating when you realize maybe where you need to work or what you're starting to realize about your habits or your thoughts, for example.
So I just kind of skipped us ahead a little bit because I wanted to take a look at obviously the worksheets. So what we've done here is we're going to use a case study just in case anybody doesn't really want to go too in depth into themselves. And so we have Owen, who is going to be our case study. And we've looked at sort of 2 examples or 2 periods in his life. So we've got his regular working conditions, and then below it, we've got his pandemic working conditions. And the reason we have both of these is because we want to look at sort of the regular life situation, self-care, and then how that changes and maybe different things we have to take into consideration during the pandemic life conditions. So I'm just going to read you Owen and his regular working conditions. So Owen is a 28-year-old international student advisor who has recently had programs he advises for changed for the third time in 2 years. He has been advising for 4 years at the college full-time, and he was part-time for 2 years. So he's been there for 6 years in total. He was an international student in the same college he now advises for. So he has a very intense relationship with his students. Owen has been very run down lately, working after hours to stay on top of his new program grouping and still touch base with his former advisees. Owen is also in a serious long-distance relationship with Violet. They spend every weekend together and alternate between homes. Owen plays recreational basketball and volleyball during the week, but he has been missing practices lately. Laura, could I get you to read the pandemic life conditions for Owen?
I'm going to bring this closer to me. Owen is working out of his apartment. He lives alone. Both Owen and Violet elected to stay at their own homes during the pandemic instead of staying together at one of their homes. They are now arguing about this decision. Owen is trying to stay connected to the students he currently advises, but he is also constantly getting emails from students he used to advise. He is setting up many one-on-one meetings and monitors group chats. His girlfriend feels that he is too tired at the end of the day to connect with her. He has suggested she join his group chats. Violet feels that the only connections that Owen is maintaining are the ones with his students. She says he is prioritizing students over the other people in his life, for example, family, friends, and teammates. Owen does not agree, but he also thinks his students need him more than others in his life at the moment.
Okay, so here are sort of two situations of Owen and how his life is going. So this is the 6-dimension wellness model. And so you can see it on the one side of your screen. It's where we have all the different aspects of our lives and how they overlap. So your emotions, your mind, your work, your relationships, your spirit, and your body. And so, as I mentioned before, it's a very simple, straightforward worksheet. We've got each of the dimensions of wellness listed, and then a simple question: what is unwell? And I said one of the reasons I like this worksheet is because it allows you to kind of deal with one thing at a time. And then the next column is what piece of intentional self-care will help. So for each of the things that is unwell, you can look at what could help remedy that situation. So if we look at some of the areas that are unwell in Owen's regular life situation, and then what could help him. So for example, in his regular life situation, we can see that he is possibly spending too much time or becoming too run down with all the changes that have been happening recently at work. So we can see that he has recently had his program area changed for the third time in 2 years, and he started to struggle to keep on top of being able to advise all of his students. And so when we look back at that dimensions, we might see that it is his work that is causing some unwellness. So what could he do? What piece of self-care could he do to help in that situation? We also see in his typical working life or his typical conditions that he plays recreational basketball and volleyball during the week, but he's been missing practices lately. So he might be suffering some issues in the physical or the body aspect of his self-care. And so those are some things that he could start plotting on this chart. And as I mentioned, it's great in the fact that you don't have to list everything that you think is unwell in any particular dimension, but what maybe is troubling you the most and how you can work on solving that issue. So for Owen, maybe in work, feeling overburdened at work because of all of the changes. So maybe some of the things he has to do is work on a better organization routine Or maybe he needs to draw a line in for himself, and instead of trying to touch base with his current students as well as his previous students in his other programs, he needs to do, probably himself and his students, the job of signing over his old students to their new advisor and just concentrating on his current students. And that's often difficult for us to do because that also falls into, our emotions and how we're feeling and our relationships with our students. But those are some areas that might help him in that what is unwell at work. Now, reflecting on Owen and his current situation, the COVID-19 and the pandemic situation, what is unwell? Well, we can see that there's now a new area that is causing Owen issues. So he is in a serious long distance relationship, and during the regular conditions, him and his girlfriend were able to spend every weekend together and alternating between their houses. And so they were spending equal amount of time at either of their homes. But because of the pandemic situations, they decided not to move in together in one person's home. And we could have a discussion about why that is. But now that is causing added stress to Owen's life. So we can look at that in sort of that emotions. What is unwell, and what could Owen, and by extension of that, Owen and Violet do to be able to have that intentional self-care for their relationship. So there's some areas in that strategy of how we can work on that intentional self-care. Laura, do you have anything to add to that?
I think too, like I'm thinking about his not getting out in his regular life to his physical activity is also, he might not have to identify it on this sheet, but it would be an interesting reflection for him to think about how that's affecting his mental and emotional health as well, because he's missing out on that connection. It's not just getting out there to do physical exercise, but being on a team does give him that sense of social connection that he's probably not realizing he's also missing as well. And then when in his pandemic situation is, I would probably add in there some work-life balance as well, because he is taking on a lot more of the workload at home, which is also then impacting the other areas of his life as well. So, and then not being able to exercise, is he feeling like a little bit of a couch potato, which adds to that might be adding to his level of frustration.
Definitely. Those are all good points, Laura. And I think that especially that work-life balance, I think we've seen that in a lot of people talking about bad habits they're coming up with. And even last time we talked about, the rows, what are some opportunities, what are some stressors you're having? I think that work-life balance, it does keep popping up because you're at home and working at home and living at home. There's almost no break to when you should stop working. And I think that's something we could address further in some of these other models. So I'm going to move on now to our shift framework model. And in this one, that shift model is basically looking at the different aspects of your life. And the big question that we want to be asking ourselves here is, what is within our control? And this really does look back at the 4 A's of managing stress, because it's what can you accept, what can you avoid, what can you alter. And in our shift model, we're really asking ourselves sort of that question over again. And when we look at the personal shifts, so for example, how do you build your support network? How do you make sure you're making the right decisions for yourself? How do you give to yourself what you give to others? And so we can look at this again in the regular working situation, but also in the pandemic situation. If we look at Owen again, how is he building his personal support network? Well, during the regular work situation, he had other student advisors to work with or to lean on, and work with those advisors with his students. but he probably feels like he's lacking that same sort of support network now that he is at home. And we can also, if he asks himself the question, what am I giving to others that I'm not giving to myself? And we kind of see that at the end of that little case study there, where Violet feels that he is prioritizing his students over everybody else, and that he thinks that his students need him more than other people in his life. And so if we look at that shift model, what does he need to shift there? Is possibly the priority that he's putting on his students or making of his students over any other aspects of his life. As we move through these different shifts, just kind of looking at what is within your ability to change, what do you need to work with other people to change, and what is beyond your ability to change or to alter. And so maybe what you need to adapt to, be it in your personal shift, your personal life, the management, your interpersonal shifts, or the environment shifts. And I think the environment shift is probably one that's really going to play a big role during this pandemic situation, and what we need to look for, because where we're working and how we're working, and depending on who's in your home with you right now, who you're working with, even if they're not working the same job as you. Like I personally think of like my children, my husband, who is an essential worker, so he's still at work every day. There's a lot of shifts there that I don't actually have to take into consideration in my normal work life that play a much larger part here in this pandemic situation. So when we're using this shift framework, that's really the primary question we're asking ourselves is what is within our control? So what can we alter? What do we need to adapt to? And then are there things that we can avoid in that stressful situation? Laura, did you have anything you wanted to add to that framework?
No, I think you covered it there. Good job.
And again, if anybody has any questions as we work through this, please feel free to put them into that question box. And then after we move through all of the strategies, we can have a discussion or answer questions that came up during our explanations.
All of the models are in our references as well. You know, I'd like to say that Natalie and I are the brains behind these models, but we're not. We have looked through them and have, you know, used them and tested them for ourselves and did some research around them, but they're all referenced with more information in the background. This is the reframing thoughts model. I see that in the one poll that some people use this. This one I've used before the pandemic times, and it's based on a CBT model, cognitive behavioral therapy. And basically, as you can see from the arrows, it's on the premise that our thoughts kind of drive our emotions, our behavior, which then has the reaction that either is going to reinforce a negative thought or reinforce a positive thought. So if the thought is if I don't help my students, in Owen's case, if I don't help my students, then I'm not doing a good enough job, or they're all going to fall apart without me. Then what is his emotion to that? He's maybe going to be anxious or worried, and the behavior then is going to be constantly online with those students, trying to solve everybody's problem. And then the feedback is either it's going to be, well, thank you for helping me, or I have more problems. And then that's going to reinforce his thought that if I'm not there to help these students, then everything's going to fall apart. So if you go to the next screen, this model goes through a series of different steps to get us to look at that thought. Sorry, I got to bring this closer so I can see it. And so then, and it's looking at the, what is the distress level? So for Owen, by feeling in that pandemic situation, and I would say even before, where he was starting to feel that he was feeling overwhelmed with his new role, his new programs and his old programs, and being needed by everybody, is, what's his level of stress? And it's on a rating of 1 to 10, right? And then identifying the emotions behind that. So is it fear of letting people down? Is it worry of not being good enough? Is it perhaps worry of being judged, that he's not, stepping up to the role, for example? And then describing the situation that's happening. So in his case, I think even before and during the pandemic, is that he's feeling that he's, constantly needed by people, and that he has to be available, 24/7 to help his students. But as a result, he's getting, into fights with his girlfriend, and that's causing himself more anxiety. And then looking at that initial thought, and where is that coming from? So there's a list of different cognitive distortions that I won't go through here, but in the worksheet, that link is available to describe them more. But, for example, the first one is all or nothing sort of thinking. He's got to be all in, because if he's not, then it's all going to fall apart, right? Or kind of thinking that overgeneralization. If it's not me, if everyone's gonna fall apart, and students are gonna fail, and something bad's gonna happen. And so kind of identifying what possible thought distortions might be happening. And then once you've sat down and you've reflected on these things, is to now challenge yourself to figure out, is my initial thought really true? Is there anything to support that? And when in Owen's case, when he sits down and maybe reflects on the people that he's helping, or the number of people that he's helping, he might see that it might be really only a handful of students that are reaching out to him, but it feels like more because there's constant emails coming from the same people. And in the big grand scheme of things, he will see that probably 80% of his caseload are actually doing okay, or solving their own problems, or they've actually passed all of their courses. So, and maybe reaching out to his colleagues that they can help, rather than thinking that he's in this all by himself. So now it's rewriting that scenario with a different thought process. Like if I work my 8 hours a day, and perhaps don't clear my inbox at the end of the day, what will be the outcome? Will the world fall apart if I take time for myself? And based on what he's learned from challenging his initial thought, he'd be able to incorporate that into his new rewriting of the situation. Identify new emotions that come with this new thought process, and then re-rate the distress level. And when I've done this for myself, it's been really interesting, because even the process of doing this, of slowing down and reflecting on my thought, after doing it, my distress level has maybe gone from a 10 actually down to a 2 or a 0 even, because I'm like, oh, I've really made this bigger than it is. And then I have a journal of this thought. So when it happens again, I can go back and go, I know this. I've been here before. Let's keep working on reframing this thought process. So this one is one of my favorites, as you can tell. So this was one of the online journals that I found. These are the two links. One is an actual thought diary, which is the second one. And the first one is this custom journal. And that's the one where you can make, they have templates or you can make your own journal. And so I made my own thought diary so that I have one app, not several different apps. So that's one of those examples. And then the next one, if you go to the next slide there, Nat. So next one is another journal that I made from the same app, and it's just a combination of all of the different tools. It might be a little long. I just kind of threw everything in there with the kitchen sink to see what I wanted. But the important thing is I have to remind myself that I don't have to fill out every single thing every single day. But I wanted to capture things like, what is my day's theme, right? What is a quote that I would like that I'm reflecting on? What is the song that I want to dance to? What is my morning routine, my to-do list, quite possibly what's my evening routine that you see at the bottom? How have I rated my day? I've included some of the 6 dimensions in there. I've included things from that Yale University course about savoring and connection and giving and receiving kindness. So this is a really interesting app that you could have on your phone and journal in it throughout the day and reflect in the mornings and in the evenings.
So the next one here is our well-being check-in. And so this one is, again, a fairly quick one to be able to do. And it's one that you would do sort of day after day. And we found it particularly useful in a situation like this, in the pandemic situation, because sometimes we just need a bit of a reminder to take care of ourselves. So you'll see the first one is essential tasks. So showering, taking medication, feeding someone something, a pet, a child, a plant, cleaning one thing. So basically just reminding yourselves of the things that, we need to slow down and take time to do. I've spoken with some colleagues that I think find that they just aren't as motivated because there's no reason to have a shower or to get dressed or to change into your pajamas if you're not going to be video conferencing with anybody that day. And so things like that, tend to kind of eat away at our motivation to be able to take care of ourselves and to do everything. If you look at number 4 here, to be mindfully present. So again, just making sure that you're taking that time to, as Laura talked about, the idea of savoring or appreciating the things that are happening in a day. Reach out to a human beyond your home. I think sometimes we in international education, I think we talk a lot about being in a silo and being separate, and now being at home and being so truly separate from all of our coworkers. We really are in that one person silo as opposed to a departmental silo that we might have felt like we were in before. So again, really taking that time to stop and ask yourselves these questions like, are you okay? Are your coworkers okay? Are you proud of the work that you got done today? And maybe not every day you are. That's okay. But what's more important is checking in with yourself and checking in with others to make sure that they are not just surviving, but hopefully working towards thriving even in the current situation that we're in. So again, it's just sorry.
And this could be something Owen could probably really benefit from if we're looking at his case study again, is knowing that, he's able to check off those boxes. And, I can say, in my role, a lot of the things that I deal with are problem solving, and sometimes you don't feel like you've solved all the problems, right? And so looking at number 10, what went well today? When you think nothing went well, there's things that did go well, right? Whether it's work or personal or family, is to remind yourself of those things. And then the other one is number 8, What went wrong? Identify it, call it out, put it out there, and then let it go, right? If you have to sing that Frozen song as you're letting it go, but it's, you know, it's, and these, I've actually incorporated this into my online journal, because this one is so easy to do. Um, and the number 12 is something that I end my journal with. It's like, what am I proud of today? Because we can always find something to be proud of, and it could just be taking that shower. That's a good thing when there's no reason to. When you, like, I live alone. When you live alone, who's going to see me, right? But the fact that I got in that shower and got to my day, and that's a good thing, right? That's something to be proud of.
Laura, did you want to talk about this plan for
Sure.
resilience?
This is just something I had found online, and it's a really good little workbook for anybody to do about building a plan for resilience. So the link is there. It's just another tool in your toolbox. It kind of helps you identify what are those things of the stressors in your life. What are some strategies to help you with those stressors and those moments? It walks you through possibly scenarios, helping you build your resilient crew that's there to help you when you need it. So just another tool for you to use, and it's free. So give it a go.
Excellent. So just before we get into sort of the discussion section, there's just a couple of points that Laura and I wanted to highlight here. And that first one's really at the top in bold, like our reactions are normal. What we are experiencing right now is abnormal. And I think that's something we all just really need to remind ourselves of. This is not the new normal. This is not going to be our typical situation. And so all of us are reacting in different ways, but in normal ways to the current situation. And yes, it's tough, but we have to remind ourselves that it is okay.
Absolutely. The next point is just being just remembering that even if someone has been diagnosed with a mental health problem or illness, you know, is to remember that changes in behavior need to still be taken within context. So if someone has been diagnosed with anxiety or depression, for example, you know, just because they're reacting in a certain way doesn't always mean it's part of their diagnosis. It could be what is actually happening in their lives right now. So being mindful of just not putting that label on somebody.
Mm-hmm. And so, you know, again, our reactions to this very abnormal situation. So give yourself and others permission and forgiveness to feel during this time. You know, I will bring up the fact again that I am home with my 3 daughters, and my eldest, she's much better now, but she had a really rough reaction to the fact that she was going to be homeschooled for a period of time. She's a very social child. She really enjoys her schoolwork. She really enjoys her friends. And so she was angry. And that most of that anger was directed towards me because I'm the one who's at home with her. And to be able to say that, yes, you're allowed to have these feelings for this, you're allowed to react in that way, but then redirecting people or emotions towards working through this and adapting to the stress and adapting to the change in situation, as opposed to just continuing to feel angry at something that's beyond our control.
Absolutely. That's a great example, Natalie. There's a link here in the next point about how to have conversations if you are concerned about somebody. It's really, you know, they're uncomfortable, and when we don't know how to help, or we're afraid to say the wrong thing to make matters worse, or if someone's going to get angry at us, then we tend to avoid it. and it's natural. So, but there are really good guides, and this is one just to help you. There's also online, if you go to the website Living Works, they have some good resources as well if you are needing some help to have conversations to people about difficult conversations, difficult topics.
And our next point, I mean, I think probably all realize this, but work and life balance is difficult during quote unquote normal times. So 1 in 3 Canadian workers report a high level of work-life conflict. So we can only imagine that in a time like this, in this pandemic time where everything is so up in the air and changing, we're trying to adapt our ways, that it's even more critical to try to balance those things out. I know somebody mentioned a bad habit of missing lunch or having late lunches. You know, it is so easy to go, okay, I'm just going to finish this email, or I'm just going to have this meeting. I'm just going to, and then the day gets away from us. So it is so critical that, you know, if it comes down to setting, you know, an alarm and it goes at 12:30 and you are stopping whatever it is you're in the middle of and you're going to have your lunch, sometimes we do need to be that on point with ourselves and make that commitment to, I'm going to take this pause because I need it. And it is so easy to let that get out of hand, even in normal times. And so to be on the ball with that, and perhaps not even just for yourselves, but as a point of check-in with your coworkers, you know, what did you have for lunch today? What did you do? Oh, I haven't stopped yet. Okay. So a check-in for, you need to stop, you need balance.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I wonder too, for people who are working from home, one partner is working from home and the other isn't, because they can't go to work and they don't have the type of work that they can do remotely. And so seeing the other partner working and wondering, you know, stop, what are you doing? You know, slow down. And that might cause some of that relationship conflict and stress in the home, right? Because if you're anything like us, you're probably getting emails constantly that you could be on the computer 24/7, and it's really important to find that balance. The other point there is to remember that we still have control, right? So I think that goes to the shift framework, is what are the things that you have control over? And then also how we measure our progress and our success during these times. It's going to be different than what we do in the office, right? And it's going to be challenged by what we have going on in our new environments. And so I think it goes back to that well-being checklist, is still acknowledging that you are having successes and there is work that you can be proud of. And one of those things you could be proud of, if you are living with a family, right, is maybe that you've achieved work-life balance somehow during these times.
Our next point is to make space for a ritual, to slow down, to create new routines. I think it's really important to note that how you live or how you kind of organize and make your routine during the regular times or normal times, quote unquote, are going to look very different from now. So, you know, if pausing to, you know, walk your dog, or to do a porch drop of a baked good at somebody's house to cheer them up, to do your grade 2 science experiment with them. You know, there's lots of different ways that we can kind of, you know, this kind of goes back to those last 2 points as well, but to slow down and enjoy what could be great things happening right now. Somebody said to me, like, as adults, baby girl, as adults, we might all be stressing out right now. We might all be stressing out right now because of how we've had to change our days. But possibly 20 years from now, our children are going to remember 2020 in a much different light than us, because it was when parents were home and meals were all together, and, you know, difficulty with math got solved faster because there was more time put into it. So making time for those things
Absolutely. I think too, Natalie, just checking on that is worrying so much now about what these rituals and these maybe really satisfying rituals of that we develop during this time at home, not worrying about whether or not we're able to continue them when we go back to the office, and maybe giving some thought about how we adjust them, but not worrying too much right now that am I going to be able to keep these good rituals going when I go back to the office. Enjoy them for when we have them at the moment. And the last one, it kind of comes back to that resilience plan is, if we can commit to a resilience plan and develop that network of help. I am very much an introvert. So I think someone on the chat had mentioned about not always connecting with people. Like I'm comfortable in my own home with myself. But I realize I talked to my aunt this morning, and she's like, I just need a voice sometimes, just to hear a voice. And yeah, you know what? It is nice, and it's making me more mindful that I can connect with people, even though I spend a lot of time by myself, but it's, I have people out there for me as well, just like, and to let people know that, and to accept people reaching out to me. So yeah, so that network of health is really important. All right, our next screen.
Discussion.
Yes, so we've talked enough. We'd like to hear from some other people about your experiences during this time. If you've used any of the models, which ones have you used, and what have the pros and cons? If you haven't used a model, maybe if you want to share, why haven't you tried, or are you interested in using one? So Melissa, you can open it up to whoever wants to share with us.
Okay, that sounds great. We had a question come in a little bit earlier when we were looking at those 6 dimensions, and someone asking for the clarification between spirit and mind. So maybe a little bit of an elaboration on that would be good.
Laura, do you want to?
Okay. No, you go ahead. This is your favorite one.
Okay, so I mean, as we see in the model itself, there is a lot of crossover. You can see where all of the circles kind of overlap. And so I think with any of the given dimensions, they do touch on other ones. But when I think about it, my biggest difference is we're looking at mind, that is really focusing more sort of on the intellectual things, learning, keeping things like, I mean, like if I think of some things that people might do, crossword puzzles, reading books, webinars, learning about different things. And how that differs for me from sort of the spiritual side is more the things that, I don't want to say food for the soul, because that seems very cliche, but a song that touches you, a religious ritual or practice that feeds you, that centers you, and that could be something that you do on your own, or that you share with others. And I don't think it really matters what religion you belong to, or what you practice. It's that thing that, again, refuels you and feeds you in a time. And we talked about intentional self-care, doing those things that they're not forced, but something that you truly enjoy. I think of an example. We attend church, and during this time, obviously we can't go to church on Sunday mornings, but to see my daughters in the living room singing their hearts out as we watch the live feed of our pastor at church, and during praise song time, that for me is a spiritual uplifting to see them still be able to partake of that and know that in other people's houses, they're also singing their hearts out to the same song. Does that help clarify?
Let's see if we get a response, but it definitely clarified for me. So thank you very much, Natalie. It's excellent. And Mami said also, thank you very much, that clarifies for her as well. So thank you. Does anyone have any questions? You can go ahead and raise your hand if you have any questions, or type them in and I'll read them out loud. Okay, here we are. We've got Haki Rancour. Here we go. I'm going to unmute you now. There we go. So the mic is yours. Oh, but you're self-muted, so you'll have to unmute yourself. There we go.
Okay. Hi, Laura and Natalie. I had a quick question regarding one of the thought diaries that Laura mentioned. Just wanted to ask how useful it would be for us to go online and write a thought diary, as we are online most of the time anyways. How does that play into the equation?
Yeah, so that's a good question. You have to find your preferred mode of journaling. I don't like pen to paper, so for me, having it on my phone and just typing it out is easier, and I actually don't mind that process. But if you like to have pen to paper and be offline, then you can just make yourself your own sheet, or you could use a journal itself and write that out. It's to each his own. I find the thought diary is interesting for me because I always have it with me. And so I'll give a really quick example of when I used it. I was having a great day or a great moment, morning, whatever you want to call it. And I was driving somewhere and at a stop, a red light, and someone honked their horn at me. And for some reason, the horn it sets me off, right? And that person honked, and I went from like, woo-doo-doo, I'm singing in the car, to flipping that guy the bird, I'll be honest. And I got mad, and my distress level went from 0 to 10. And I was like, afterwards, I thought, why am I doing this? So I sat down when I got to my destination. I took out my thought diary and I recounted this scenario, and I went through maybe my thought, and my thought is like, this person's rude, or I'm not at fault here, and why is it someone just attacking my authority, or all whatever it was. I can't remember exactly all of my thoughts around this, but as I moved through it, I rewrote the scenario and thought, well, maybe this person was having a bad day as well, or maybe this person was late for something, and my reaction could have been, oh, sorry, and just drove away and not let it react, let me react that way. So ever since doing that, I've been really more aware of what my choice is when I get honked at. Not that I get honked at a lot, because I'm not a bad driver, but but it is that trigger for me for many different reasons we will not get into here. But anyway, so I found having that that on my phone was a really quick way to let go of that emotion.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think it does. Thank you.
You can have the book in your purse if you want, but I don't carry a purse, so.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I have a comment that just came in here from Mami, who wanted the clarification on the mind and spirit. So she says, I think I will start using the 6 dimensions, the 6-dimension wellness model combined with the mental health continuum model once a week.
Perfect.
Awesome.
That's terrific.
And you may start and find that it doesn't work for you. And again, it's reframing that thought that, well, if I don't continue, am I failing somehow? No, you're just finding something different. And you just keep experimenting.
And that is a key point we brought up last time is that self-care and intentional self-care is not one size fits all. It really has to be individual and to the what you're experiencing right now. So, your typical self-care in January of this year is not going to look like the same self-care you're experiencing right now in April, heading into May, heading into week 7 of being at home. And so that's really important to remember that your self-care is so much about you and your needs and what you're going through and how you are focusing on supporting yourself. And so maybe right now starting an online journal is not the best thing for you. And so paper journaling is better, or maybe coffee time every other day with somebody who has a similar life experience that you can talk things out with. Maybe that's what really works right now for supporting you. And then once we get back to the regular work world, you might find something else is missing and something else needs to be supported. So it's never, you should never think of it as, well, this is what works, so this is what I'm doing. It sort of is something that's always growing and changing and working for that support of you and what's going on in your life.
Anybody else would like to share? Anyone who hasn't tried anything, just curious, or if you found the exercises frustrating, I'd be curious to hear about your experience.
So nothing at the moment has come through. So we'll give people, oh, there we go. Okay, we've got Parvinder again here. I'll give you the mic. There we go. And you're self-muted, so you can go ahead and unmute yourself. There we go.
Hi again. I won't say that I find exercise little frustrating, but yes, at the first I was like little procrastinating every time. So I'll do it next day, I'll do it after an hour, I'll do after 15 minutes. It has always been like that. But now, I was even listening to you that, what to give yourself to care yourself and to give time to yourself. So I thought, so that's what I have been practicing also, to give few, some time to ourselves, to practice our mental health and even our physical strength also, because we can somehow utilize this time being in this situation since we are locked down. But it is actually helpful. Earlier it was not, because I was not feeling that way, but now I am too. So yes.
That's awesome. And it does take it like many things, it takes practice, right? You just don't fall into this and pick it up where it feels natural. And doing something on a daily basis you start to look forward to it, right? You start to think, well, I look forward to filling out that journal. I look forward to reflecting on my self-care and finding something to take care of me.
Yeah, here, I mean, I would say it usually takes longer time to even make understand. Making understand mind that you have to do it. But if we start slowly and smoothly, I mean, we do not do the big chunk, but even if we start with 5 minutes meditation by sitting in the car or maybe by sitting in the kitchen, anywhere, it just helps, grows and grows every day. So I guess I have even developed this habit by doing it from now it's been more than a month I'm doing it. So it
Awesome.
took me time, yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Fabulous.
Okay, so that's all we've got for the moment, ladies. So I don't know if we're kind of at time, so I don't know if we want to wrap up.
So here's our list of references. So please, everything we got is in those references, and there's so much good information out there. And as Natalie said, it's not a one size fit all. So you can find, you know, a lot of different resources to help you during this time and throughout our lives.
Mm-hmm. I just want to highlight this one right here, Social Work Buffalo. This is a great one, especially if you've never done any sort of self-care. It really walks you through lots of different parts, from sort of an assessment all the way to building your own plan. So it's a great one too for getting started if you've never really looked into intentional self-care before.
And the one about, I'm trying to find it, it's a PowerPoint on the shift model. It's in there as well. It's the burnout common problems for students, for school counselors, Nat. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's
the fourth one. Yeah.
Yep, that's a good one too.
They're all good ones, but it, like Laura said, it's looking at what works best for you and reading a bit and what kind of speaks to you. Laura and I are very different in what we really like, but the key is just finding what does not seem like a chore for you, something that you look forward to doing, because that's what's going to support and refuel you.
So a quick question. I had a comment a little bit earlier about someone who said I didn't try the worksheets because I'm taking an online course. I've got my kids to take care of. I'm training in a new position, et cetera, et cetera. So what kind of advice do you give to individuals who just feel like there is no time for themselves? What's the first step for individuals who are in that frame of mind?
That's a good question. Is maybe just identify one thing a day that you would like to focus on, or even develop a routine. I got a book called Habit Nest, and it's just a very simple journal on developing a morning routine, or even, and then you kind of have a short checklist. It identifies what's one thing you need to accomplish that day, and then at the end of the day is what is one thing that, like, 1% of something that you can do to improve the next day. And I found that to be really helpful to get started. I also got a whiteboard actually just before we got on lockdown, and I put that actually by my bedroom door, and I just write down a couple of things that I want to get done for the day. And so I wake up and I see it, and I like to check things off, so I can still go and just like pick a check mark. And so just start small, right? You don't have to do a massive journal.
No, and I agree with Laura. And I think sometimes even the first step is just identifying that something that you really enjoy doing and making sure you make time to do that in the day. And if that is, and sometimes you compare it with other things you have to get done, right? I love cooking, and so something I found during this time that has really been great for me is I'm looking up new recipes that I never had time to do before, because I mean, I can chop some stuff up and throw it on the pan and come back to my computer, but I'm still making time to do something I enjoy. And that's sort of, I think, really the first step is slowing down and making sure that you make that commitment to add something you really enjoy into your day. Because once you do that, you realize there is time. I can make time. And that sort of begins that shift of, okay, well, what else can I look at? What else can I change? What else can I adapt to support myself?
But again, coming back to that well-being checklist, it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be just one thing that you start with, and that's enough. It's one thing more than yesterday, and that's enough. And if you want to start like that and develop a simple habit, then you can always build on it later.
Great. Thank you to the both of you for all of your really great advice. I think that this is important for all of us, and we can hopefully start step by step and improving our lives, our well-being, and that can transfer over. Like, this is such a great opportunity for us to take this moment, to take this pause, and to have this shift happen to us, so that when we go back to something else, we can maintain that in our lives. So I want to thank you very, very much. And people are sending in their thank yous as I speak. So I'll just be wrapping up the webinar just quickly. For more professional development opportunities, please check out our website, cbie.ca. We do have a webinar archive with free webinars that you can download. It's also available on our dashboard, our COVID-19 dashboard, which is like the first thing you can see when you log to cbie.ca. All our resources that have been, curated, along with other really great resources relevant to international ed in these times, are available right there. And also you can check out our events page for upcoming webinars. And so I've already thanked you again. I can't thank you enough. You guys, this is the second one you've done, and every time I really appreciate that we've gone in more depth in all of the models, and really have given us some really great strategies to take our well-being in our own hands. So thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. I hope you're coming away with this with some really great knowledge and resources, and the links, all of the links, the resources are terrific. So thank you. You will have a short survey as soon as we turn off this webinar, and also in the follow-up email. So we'd love to hear your feedback on today's webinar. And if there's anything else that CBIE can kind of suss out for you, please provide us with some recommendations of other things that other webinars, or if you're interested in presenting a webinar, please let us know and we'll reach out to you. And so the recording will be available. So both recordings of both part 1 and part 2 will be available in the follow-up email, as well as the handouts. So all of the worksheets, and we'll make sure to add that 6-dimension worksheet as well for you. Any questions, just contact us at learning@cbie.ca. And if you want to get in touch with Laura and Natalie, I'm happy to forward your email off to them directly. And that's it. So thank you so much, and wishing all of you an excellent rest of the week and weekend ahead. Hopefully you can all rest up and take care during these times, and make the most of it.
Thank you so much for allowing us to do this, not once but twice, and for everybody that that showed up again. It's just it really does fill our cup. And we love to be able to share with people. So thank you, and be well.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been lovely.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.